And this is Grover Norquist with Americans for Tax Reform. This is the Leave Us Alone podcast for people who want to be left alone by the government. And we have good news. We're going to talk about jobs, fewer government jobs, more real American jobs. Then we're going to talk about actual spending restraint, reductions in spending, CBO's projections of what growth is happening in the future, and some really stupid ideas that need to be strangled and thrown out the window. But we're going to start with jobs. James, you?
That's right, Grover. We had an excellent jobs report that came out just the other day, and it shows strong gains in the private sector, and this is offsetting job losses in the public sector. We are now at the lowest number of federal workers since 1961, thanks to DOGE and thanks to the work of OMB under director vote. And
One second. This number, this is the lowest, not the lowest percentage, the lowest number. So
Correct.
We're a much bigger country than 1960. We had 100 million people back then.
I think we've almost doubled in population since then. Yeah.
Okay.
This is an enormous success for the conservative movement and for the Leave Us Alone coalition to shrink the federal workforce. And despite that, we have a net gain of over 120,000 jobs just in the month of January. Federal jobs fell by 34,000, and they are down 327,000 since President Trump took office.
Average pay 100,000 plus. That's a lot of money.
Plus benefits, plus fringe, plus all the days they get paid not to work, many of which occur during government shutdowns.
Pensions.
Not to mention the fact that all of them work full-time, standing in the way of innovation. All of them work full-time, spending money and regulating businesses. So the fewer people we're paying to do that, that's not just a savings directly for the taxpayer, but it contributes directly to growth. It contributes to efficiencies.
Okay.
And it's a great opportunity for technological innovation in government through AI taking over some of these tasks, and outside of government for workers to have new opportunities. I mentioned AI, and I want to quickly just reiterate that many people were afraid that we were going to have this big wipeout of private sector employment because artificial intelligence can take over some clerical work. That doesn't seem to be the case. We see more hiring. Now, obviously, there's shuffling around as engineers are let go from some firms and picked up by others. There's going to be growing pains and adjustments. But right now, we're not seeing any significant impact in the job market that's negative from the growth of artificial intelligence.
Okay. The Luddites always tell us that innovation and progress will ruin everything and cost jobs. In the United States of America, we used to have 90% of people in the country worked as farmers. And not too long ago, it was 70% of people worked as farmers. Now it's between 1% and 2%. And we have more food, much richer farmers, much more successful farmers. They're doing just fine. There are many fewer of them in absolute numbers and a percentage, and people find other work to do, creating and building other products.
We should
straight to spending, or you got
compared to what the expectations were as well. Forecast had about 55,000 job creation. So when you come in at 170,000 private sector jobs created, we saw Bloomberg just ran articles before the anticipation of the release of the report saying they expected zero job creation here. So it is a massive beat to start off the year here. I think the obvious thing to connect this to is it is just happening as we have the major provisions of the Trump tax cut bill kicking in. The last 2 quarters of economic growth, nearing 4% to end the third quarter, forecasting have around 3.8% for the fourth quarter of 2025. This is all happening right after we have the tax bill passing and these provisions kicking in. We made such a huge point out of how important it was that Republicans learn from their lesson in 2017, where they waited for all the provisions of the tax cuts to kick in until 2018, kicking in as the midterms. Now we have all this growth kicking in immediately. We're already seeing it hit the economy now. And I think James makes a great point there too about how this is also a big kick to the story that AI is going to lead to costing people their jobs. We're seeing increased productivity, increased real wage growth as well, which we didn't have for 3.5 years of the Biden administration. Wages declined compared to inflation. We're now over 1% real wage growth. So when we talk about affordability, it's a two-sided coin. real wages against inflation are increasing now in the first year of the Trump administration.
Yeah. Okay. Well, one of the things we were trying to do in this year and in Republican governance is to bring spending down.
Well, the appropriators in Congress have avoided a government shutdown. We had one, the Schumer shutdown late last year. And to get out of it, they actually passed 11 of their 12 appropriation bills through regular order. And you won't believe it, but they actually cut spending by, drumroll, a grand total of $1 billion. Now, against a $38 trillion debt, that's not very much, but it is a start. And this is the first time since the 90s we've had a net reduction in spending from the federal government. There is a blog up on atr.org that we posted yesterday that I think explains this well. Congress cuts wasteful spending and appropriations bills. So there was an 18% cut, $18 billion from domestic spending. 17 billion of that got plugged into military spending, but that meant there was still a net $1 billion savings for the American taxpayer. And it shows this is what happens when you don't pack everything together in an omnibus that's 10,000 pages long that you drop on your members. When you do the hard work of passing the 12 bills separately, funding the different sections of the government, you can find your savings here and there. You can fight it out one by one without a major leverage point for the Democrats who want to always increase wasteful spending no matter what. So the fact that they came to the table and actually agreed to a lot of this, and this is, of course, on top of $9 billion in rescissions, where we defunded public media, so we no longer have state-funded broadcasters, and got rid of some woke foreign aid spending. And on top of the 327,000 federal workers that we just were talking about, that we have fewer of, and whose benefits we don't have to pay, whose salaries we no longer have to pay, that's a permanent savings going out into the future. And on top of the provisions of the tax cut that Mike was just talking about,
The $1 billion of spending cuts you're talking about right now, just to remind our listeners, that is just within the appropriations process alone. So we talk about trying to, we actually delivered a cut,
Yes.
not just maintaining the
This is
growth
just
of government at a
discretionary
lower rate,
spending.
but actually delivered a real cut here in the appropriations process compared to last year, which is huge. And that's not even taking into account previous efforts we've seen at a Office of Management budget for most vote, the rescissions package for over $9 billion, or of course the massive spending cuts we saw during the One Big Beautiful Bill, the Working Families Tax Cut, which, as you said, that's $1.2 trillion in Medicaid savings. Real entitlement reform finally done by this Republican Congress. So I think all the haters out there who say, oh, this Republican Congress hasn't done anything, they don't understand how big of a difference that bill was, or the hard work that the Republicans are putting in with this appropriations process to get us out of Biden levels of spending and lock in Trump levels of spending and deliver actual cuts.
And I think it's worth mentioning, this is just discretionary spending. So when I was talking about the appropriations process, that's military spending and domestic programs, but it doesn't count mandatory spending, which are the entitlement programs. That's Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, everything that you can touch in sort of reconciliation. And so many people will complain that, well, it's just $1 billion and it's on the smallest of the 4 accounts that you have. Fair enough, but it's a start. And I think if we don't applaud appropriators like Tom Coles, the House Appropriations Chair, Senator Susan Collins, who I used to work for as the Senate Appropriations Chair, if we don't applaud their hard work and Russ Vought's hard work at OMB to at least start the process of restraining spending, then what's the incentive to continue it? There's one other opportunity worth flagging here, too, which is that the infrastructure bill created a $40 billion broadband deployment program. And under Secretary Howard Lutnick at Commerce and Assistant Secretary Ariel Roth, who runs the National Telecommunications and Information Administration that dispenses the BEAD funds, it's what's called the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, they've saved half the money by changing the rules, by getting rid of the Biden-era rules and adopting a more free market, open, competitive approach. They've saved $21 billion, and now they're asking us. I participated in a listening session yesterday at the NTIA. What do we do with this money? And it was hilarious because it was a bunch of libraries and state and local governments coming in and saying, well, it's absolutely vital that you fund this project. And everybody had a different absolutely vital project that they need funded. And then there was a small group of us who every now and then got to chime in and say, Listen, everybody's going to tell you their thing's essential. Why don't you give it back to the taxpayer? Why don't you reward the hard work of the people who managed to save this money and use it to offset our deficit on an annual basis? So all this to say, there might be 20 billion more in savings before this year is out, in addition to everything that we've just talked about.
Okay, so what does the CBO project for growth? One of the things that we expect from Republican tax cuts is to see stronger growth in the number of people working, GDP numbers themselves, people's income. What are the projections now that we've seen both the tax cuts locked in permanently into the future and some spending restraint that goes out quite a ways?
For my folks, we
now
got a new
for
forecast coming out
growth.
of the Congressional Budget Office yesterday, taking a look at the expected anticipated impact of the tax cut bill. Now that it's both in effect, it's easier to forecast our numbers. I'll give a shout out here to Ryan Ellis of Center for a Free Economy, former ATR employee, who did an excellent breakdown on Twitter of the report itself. According to CBO, the working families tax cut will increase GDP by 0.7%. It's going to increase our labor force participation rate by 0.4% and hours worked by 0.6%, attributing all of these great forecasted numbers due to the higher levels of investment and lower tax rates locked in from the bill. It projects that business fixed investment in equipment will grow by $433 billion in factories across the country and in offices by $150 billion. IP products by $264 billion over the next decade. I think a great thing for taxpayers to hear. The effective marginal tax rates are coming down. The marginal tax rate on labor falling from just over 30% to 28%. Marginal effective tax rate on business assets coming down 22.7% to 17.1%. 15% for factory expensing made permanent. On the spending cut side of this, we had huge progress made. We had cut to government spending on waste, fraud, and abuse. Obamacare, Medicaid spending reduced over $1 trillion. Student loans reduced by $300 billion. SNAP benefits, food stamps, spending reduced by $200 billion. So again, we had a lot of frustration, alleged frustration at the time, over the lack of spending restraint in this bill. This is massive generational delivered wins in this tax bill on spending restraint. Real entitlement reform we've talked about for decades has never happened, done here in this bill. As a result of all those reductions to the spending baseline, entitlement spending will go down by over $1.2 trillion as a result for the working family tax cuts. Lower taxes, lower spending, economic growth, higher wages because of this bill, all shown in CBO's latest forecast that I encourage everyone to go read. And again, I think Ryan Ellis did a great breakdown. I encourage everyone to go look at his Twitter for it as well.
Well, that's pretty impressive, and not what. And the CBO has often in the past understated the supply side effects of lower tax rates.
I would argue
Models,
that
or are
they're
they
still
just looking at
undervaluing
something that
the
they just
impact of the
can't
tax cut
deny?
bill. This was a point Republicans made at the time, that their forecast numbers on economic growth were very low. I believe hovering around 2%, possibly even lower than that. I think because they use the average growth rates, and they're still thinking in the Obama years, where it was just accepted we were going to have under 2% growth. I think Republicans were arguing that they should assume just 2.6% growth. As we just said earlier, in the first 2 quarters we've had since the tax bill's been enacted, since these provisions have been in place, we've had, I think, just under 4% growth for the third quarter, and current forecasts around 3.8%. So I think they're still massively undervaluing the impact of the tax bill, of the economic growth as a whole. And we're seeing, I think that'll impact the dynamic revenue implications for this as well. So basically, I still think their forecast, and when Democrats and the media lie to you about the lost revenue to the government around this and the economic impacts, all of it, the media is not going to tell this good story. I haven't seen the New York Times writing about this.
And the best way, the only way to reduce the damage the deficit and debt do is to grow the economy as rapidly as we can, so that the total debt is a smaller and smaller percentage of the economy. The end of World War II, it was 100% of GDP, 100% of the economy was the size of the national debt. But by 30 years out, it was down to 20% because the economy grew faster than the deficit added up. They didn't run a bunch of surpluses. The debt was still a big number, but it was dwarfed by growth. So this growth is going to make the debt less damaging, less scary, less annoying as it becomes a smaller and smaller percentage of our output as we do this. What is this new idea that people have that we should go back and try price controls again, which I thought had been discredited every time they've been tried for the last several thousand years?
James, why don't you kick it off?
Diocletian.
Yes. So, well, you say Diocletian. That's my favorite example, but we have to remember that Hammurabi also included price controls in his famous code that said you should be blinded or have your son executed if you built a house poorly. But every time that the state attempts to micromanage the cost of something, as Friedrich Hayek wrote back in the 40s and 50s, it is impossible for any group of people to rationally know how much something actually costs. They will never have as much knowledge as the decentralized decision-making of millions of peoples interacting with each other, buying and selling, working in their own self-interest, living their own lives. That sum of knowledge is always greater than anything any computer or any committee of bureaucrats can come up with. Therefore, the price mechanism, allowing people to charge how much they think something is worth or how much somebody else will be willing to pay for it, is the best way of determining what something is worth. And when the government tries to force you to sell something that a lot of people want, but is in short supply at a lower price than you should be, you are going to run out. This is what happened in the 70s when there were gas lines. It wasn't because inflation had kicked in yet. Some people seem to think that the OPEC oil embargo caused inflation. It didn't. It caused shortages because President Nixon, and this was continued under Carter, imposed wage and price controls by executive order. Says you can't charge any more than this for gas. And actually getting rid of those price controls was part of what led to the collapse of the Soviet Union, because when they could charge a market rate, they didn't have to buy all this Russian oil to fill up their stocks, and that cut off their oil market and caused their economy collapse when they couldn't afford to buy enough missiles to keep up with the Reagan defense spending. Anyway, all that aside, if you try and force somebody to sell something that everybody wants for a lower price than they're willing to pay, you're going to run out. And if you try and force somebody to sell something that nobody wants at an artificially high price, trying to set a floor, you're not going to sell off your stock and you're going to go bankrupt. Trying to control the price or trying to keep up with what the market thinks the price ought to be, the market being, again, millions of people making independent decisions that interact with each other, you're going to mess up. You're going to create shortages. That is the only way this ever turns out. That's what happened to Hammurabi. That's what happened to Diocletian. That's what happened when the Continental Congress tried to impose price controls during the Revolutionary War, because there were shortages of supplies for the Continental Army. They only did it for a year and then realized it was a mistake and stopped. And Washington's troops were much better supplied afterwards. This was actually almost exactly 250 years ago. It was the year 76 to 77 that they tried it. The same is true when it comes to credit. Now, sometimes people think that when you have a more abstract concept like internet service or credit, that the same thing doesn't apply as it would to, say, produce or livestock. But the fact is, it is the same. Credit cards charge interest rates which reflect the price of credit to the individual trying to use the credit card. A credit card is you swipe a credit card, you're taking out an incredibly short-term loan, and if you don't pay it back, you get charged interest. The rate of interest that is imposed on your credit card reflects the price of credit for you based on the likelihood that you will pay back, which is based on your credit history of whether or not you've paid back your card in the past. Additionally, it is not free to run a network of cards that work with each other, and so there are swipe fees that are charged to merchants, which are usually between 1% and 3%. There are multiple proposals now to cap interest rates and control the prices, interchange fees as they're called, that are charged to maintain the system. All this is going to do is lead to a shortage of credit cards. It's going to blow up the existing networks. It's going to lead to a shortage of credit. It's going to make it harder for poorer working people to get credit cards and get access to money that they need to pay the rent. And they're going to force them to go to loan sharks and payday lenders who charge you a 300% interest rate when you don't pay back, rather than, a 30% rate, which is pretty standard throughout the country. So all this to say that price controls have never worked historically. They create shortages. And the same is true when it comes to access to credit or access to the internet or anything.
So James, I think what we've
abstract as
got
much as it
going on
does
here
anything
essentially,
physical.
we've seen this cast of characters in the administration, the staff around the White House, who have pitched the president on plenty of bad ideas before, who I think we felt were trying to sabotage us on the tax bill, who wanted to divide the one big beautiful bill into two bills so that we never got to the tax cuts. And now I think the same group misleading the president and pitching him on what is an Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders policy to cap credit card interest rates at 10. Well,
Oh, yeah. And
why don't you tell
three
us?
guesses on who the Republican co-sponsor is.
I got
Right.
It's, believe it or not, it's Josh Hawley.
there's a lot of things with Bernie Sanders. So
Yeah, and I think there's a really
he's the Republican Bernie Sanders.
Yeah. So Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, and Josh Hawley got together
if
to
you are one
control
of 60%
prices on
of
credit.
Americans who are paying their credit card bill every month, this does nothing for you. And you're being asked to take a hit, threaten your credit card. I think it's 88% of Americans would have their credit card entirely threatened by just the Credit Card Competition Act. Is that it? Right.
Yes, that's correct. And that's the price control on
So you could
the
lose your
interchange
credit
fees,
card.
which support the network, rather not even the credit itself. So that would be
So
blowing
the
the
60% of
entire
Americans who are
infrastructure that
paying
we
their
used to
bill
pay.
every month could have their credit card threatened, their reward program threatened, to essentially cap the interest for the guy who's out there not paying his credit card every month. I think it's insulting. It's punishing people who are doing the right thing. It's growing government interference. We should not be pivoting now. When we're talking about affordability, that doesn't mean embracing Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren's policies. It's something the president should walk away from immediately. It's something ATR is very focused on. We launched a $700,000 ad campaign this week, including a TV ad on this. I encourage everyone to go look at it. We'll make sure folks see it. But something we're going to be fighting against, and I think we should be dropping all price control talk together. That's what the other team ran on, not our team.
Bernie Sanders lost the election. Trump won the election. Trump won the election. Trump won the election. We shouldn't be putting Bernie Sanders policies in. He lost the election, not the other way around. So, guys, thank you very much. We look forward to seeing everybody again at Americans for Tax Reform. We do this podcast, the Leave Us Alone podcast, because people should be left alone by the government.